What if Sparta's most terrifying rituals weren't fought on the battlefield, but carried out in secret deep in the mountains, far from the eyes of the city? Every Spartan boy was taken from his family and thrown into the agoge, a brutal system designed to break weakness and build obedience. But ancient writers hint at something darker. Hidden rites. Older men guiding their chosen youths through lessons that mixed violence, endurance, and intimacy. Some called it mentorship, others corruption, and still others the heart of Spartan unity. Were these acts truly about discipline or something far more disturbing hidden behind the word training? Drop the time you're watching Dawn Midnight or anywhere in between. And if you want history told raw the way it was lived, hit subscribe, no pressure. But the next story reveals even darker truths from the ancient world. Some stories were buried for a reason, but we're here to dig them up. They tell you Sparta chooses only the strong, but that's the first lie. You are chosen because the city wants to see if it can break you. That's the secret nobody whispers too loudly when the elders appear at your family's door at age 7. One moment you're a wide-eyed child chasing goats in the dust. The next you're handed to the state like a seed thrown into fire. Your mother doesn't cry, at least not where anyone can see her. The Spartans thought tears were a contagious disease. You walk behind a soldier whose armor clinks with a slow rhythm of inevitability. The agoge awaits that notorious Spartan education, which is less about reading and more about removing anything soft inside you. It's not a school, it's a forge. And you, little initiate, are the iron. The older boys glance at you with that half-smile that's not really a smile at all. It's the kind wolves give before they decide whether to bite. The first night, your blanket is the ground, your lullaby, the crack of whips in the courtyard. You learn fast that comfort is treason. If you think of your mother's hands, or the smell of her bread, the ache inside your stomach will soon remind you of the new rule. Hunger is your tutor now. Each growl teaches discipline. Each bruise endurance. They call it virtue. You start to call it life. It's almost funny in a grim sort of way how the Spartans wrapped cruelty in poetry. They'd say, "We make men by making them wolves." But what they really made were boys who slept with one eye open, fearing not the enemy, but their peers. You eat secretly, steal when you can, and if caught, the crime isn't theft, it's incompetence. There's a strange logic here. Punishment isn't for sin, but for getting caught sinning. It's like a moral math problem, where honesty always loses. At dusk, you march in lines that never seem to end, chanting hymns about courage while your ribs play xylophone beneath your skin. The instructor, a man with a voice like gravel, tells you to love Sparta more than your life, because soon they'll be the same thing. He says the word love so casually that you almost believe he knows what it means. And then the whispers begin. Not all rites happen in daylight. There's a murmur about something called the bond. No one explains it. Explanations are for philosophers in Athens, not for soldiers in training. You just notice that older men start taking particular interest in certain boys. They call it mentorship, but the way their eyes linger feels different. You don't have the language for it, only the instinct to stay very still when it happens. This too is part of the initiation. The Spartan system believed intimacy could forge loyalty, and so the agoge blurred lines between affection and control. Some historians call it mentorship, others manipulation. Either way, it created soldiers who obeyed from a mix of fear and longing. You watch, you listen, you pretend not to understand. But you understand enough. The city wants to own your body before it owns your sword. One night under the torchlight, the instructor asks who among you wishes to be remembered. Hands rise automatically. What child wouldn't want that? He nods slowly, then says, "Then learn to forget yourself." The paradox hangs in the air like smoke. It's the first of many lessons that will make less and less sense until confusion itself becomes obedience. You notice the city's rhythms now, the morning drills that echo like thunder, the smell of sweat and bronze, the distant chants of women dancing in temples, thanking the gods for men they'll never see again. The agoge is everywhere inside the marble, the songs, even the way the river curves around the city, as if obeying orders. You feel like the whole world is Spartan, and anything outside is myth. Sometimes when the moon is high, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in the water, and barely recognize the face staring back. The boy who left home has vanished. In his place stands a creature shaped by rules he didn't write. You wonder if this was always the plan to turn you into something so disciplined, even your doubts march in formation. And yet, beneath all the dust and bruises, something stirs. Maybe it's pride. Maybe it's defiance. Maybe it's both tangled up in the same heartbeat. You start realizing the agoge isn't just testing your strength, it's studying your soul. Every command, every ritual, every silent glance between instructor and boy is an experiment in control. You're not learning to fight enemies. You're learning to surrender beautifully. If you ever questioned why Sparta was so feared, this is it. Their soldiers didn't just follow orders, they were trained to want to follow. You might laugh if your ribs didn't hurt so much at how perfectly the system works. Imagine a modern boot camp run by philosophers who banned kindness but demanded poetry. That's the agoge in a nutshell. The torches burn low. You curl up on the cold floor bones, humming with exhaustion, and for the first time, you sense the city watching, even in your dreams. Somewhere beyond the walls, your mother might still be awake, whispering your name into the night. But Sparta has already decided what to call you next. The first thing they take is the mirror. Not the bronze kind, those are for temples and actors, but the invisible mirror you carry inside that tells you who you are. In the agoge, identity is treated like a loose thread. Pull it clean out, and the fabric will lie flat. The paidonomos, the official in charge of boys, starts the unweaving with details so ordinary, you almost miss the point. Your hair is clipped close, not as a fashion statement, but as a reset button, because in Sparta, a boy's head is a ledger, and the city prefers a clean page. Grown men will later wear long hair that flows from their helmets like quiet rivers. But for now, your scalp declares you are unfinished business. Then comes the name game. Your family name doesn't vanish exactly. It just becomes less relevant than your herd, your age class, and your obedience. You're sorted into a bua, a herd under an older boy who answers to the paidonomos. That older boy, call him your immediate weather system, sets the climate for your days. When his mood is thunder, you learn the art of being lightning-proof. When it's clear, you try not to look grateful. Gratitude can be misread as softness, and softness is the one currency Sparta refuses to mint. Clothes simplify you. One cloak a year, the famous crimson that will someday look dramatic on a battlefield, must serve as coat, blanket, and statement piece. You go barefoot because shoes are for Athenians who debate comfort while you practice doing without it. You sleep on reeds. You cut yourself a DIY mattress that teaches 2 lessons at once. Beds are privileges, and your hands must solve problems before your mouth proposes solutions. If you keep count, you'll notice how many comforts the city subtracts. It's like watching a sculptor chip away everything that isn't Spartan until the only thing left is a posture. Food continues its career as your strictest mentor. You eat at the messes, though you're not yet a full member of a session that honor waits for your 20s. Still, you get the rhythm. Simple fair black broth that smells like a dare, and the rule that theft is a skill, not a sin, provided you're good at it. Caught stealing the whip argues with your back that your real failure was tactical, not moral. If you've ever worked in a place where missing the deadline mattered more than missing the point, you already understand the logic at play. Words go on a diet, too. You're trained to be laconic, brief, dry, aimed like an arrow. Plutarch will someday collect Spartan one-liners, the way kids collect shells, but for now, it's muscle memory. Every sentence should be as lean as your waist. When a visiting adult asks a question designed to earn him a witty child's applause, you answer with a half-sentence that lands like a spear tip. You notice how silence begins to feel like armor. It doesn't take long before even your thoughts speak in short clauses. Music doesn't disappear, contrary to the modern myth of Sparta, as rhythm-proof. You march to the olos, the double flute that keeps hoplite feet from stepping on each other's courage. You learn hymns that compress ethics into melody, and you discover the unsettling power of hundreds of voices breathing in time. The city understands that people who sing together move together, and people who move together are easier to steer. If you've ever been swept along by a stadium chant, you didn't start, you know the current. The public eye becomes your second skin. Praise and mockery act like twin reins, and you feel both tugging your jawline into the correct angle. Spartan educators prefer ridicule over lectures. If you botch a drill, nobody writes a memo. They sharpen a joke and let it ricochet through the ranks until you'd rather wrestle a boar than hear it again. The lesson sticks because laughter is more adhesive than fear. That's not an accident. Like Kyrgyz, whether lawgiver or legend, supposedly designed a system where the crowd did the correcting and the official only nodded. Religion drifts everywhere like smoke from the altar. You pass the shrine of Artemis Orthia and flinch without meaning to, because you've heard about the ritual floggings there. That spectacle belongs to later, but the shadow of it is already part of the decor. You learn the names of the gods as they were departments in City Hall. Ares for courage, Artemis for endurance, the Dioscuri for comradeship. Offerings punctuate the week. Priests and priestesses watch you the way gardeners watch saplings, judging which will grow straight without too many corrective stakes. Family life tapers into a distant horizon line. You might see your parents on festival days, and your mother's eyes will measure you with a scale no court could build. She wants proof that the city didn't select the wrong child, not because she doubts you, but because Spartan women are trained to invest in outcomes, not explanations. They run estates while the men train and fight, and their strength is the part of Sparta no poet can fully fit in a verse. If you ever wondered how a society keeps working while half its men are at drill, now you do. You get a crash course in what the city values by what it removes. No toys, so you learn to play with rules. No luxury, so you learn to make scarcity look chic. No privacy, so you master a public face that doesn't blink. Even leisure is clipped short and trained to heal. When the instructor calls a halt, boys sit without slumping because the floor is made of eyes. If you drift into daydreams, a pebble taps your ankle, the Spartan version of a calendar reminder. Occasionally a name from beyond your world slips into conversation. Tertius, the poet who wrote marching songs. Leonidas, who will one day make a narrow pass famous. Agesilaus, who proves that cleverness and a limp can still conquer reputations. These figures are biographies in progress. You're expected to imitate, not idols you're meant to adore. The point isn't worship. It's calibration. You adjust your inner compass against their stories until north points exactly where the city wants it. So the stripping is not a melodramatic ceremony with gongs and declarations. It's administrative genius. Take a child, normalize discomfort ration, language ration, food ration, attention, and let peer pressure do most of the polishing. Before long, you carry yourself like a person who belongs to a sentence without a subject is expected to endure. If I asked you right now quietly, so the paidonymos doesn't hear, what's the one comfort you miss most? What would you say? The bread? The bed? Or is it the freedom to be ordinary without feeling like you failed an exam? They say every Spartan boy gets a sponsor, but the word doesn't quite fit. It isn't a mentor who teaches you math, it's a man who teaches you how to disappear into obedience. You don't choose him. He chooses you quietly, as if selecting a weapon he means to polish until it gleams. The others call him your inspirer. In theory, he's supposed to guide you through the next stage of the agoj, how to move, fight, speak, and survive. But what he's really shaping is your reflection, trimming away anything too human. He meets you under the olive trees outside the barracks, where moonlight turns the dust silver. He talks softly, like someone coaxing a wild dog. You want to be strong, he asks. Of course you nod. In Sparta, that's not even a question. It's a prayer. He tells you strength comes from loyalty, loyalty from trust, trust from something deeper that doesn't have a name. You're not sure whether this is philosophy or recruitment. Either way, you feel the net tighten. The city encourages these attachments. In Athens, an older man might mentor a boy for art or debate. In Sparta, it's a strategy. Affection is weaponized. If your loyalty is bound to one warrior, it's easier for the state to bind all of you together later. It's a system that fuses mentorship, camaraderie, and something more ambiguous into one command: obey. Think of it as emotional conscription. Some modern historians call it social engineering ahead of its time. Others more bluntly call it indoctrination wrapped in tenderness. You start noticing patterns. When you run drills, he watches not like a teacher, but like a craftsman checking his tool. When you stumble, he doesn't scold, just looks disappointed, and somehow that hurts more than any whip. The Spartans have discovered the emotional physics of control. The gentlest pressure leaves the deepest dent. One evening, after a brutal day of wrestling, he calls you aside. You expect punishment, maybe a lecture about footwork. Instead, he hands you a small piece of cheese, a forbidden luxury. He smiles, tells you to eat it quickly before anyone sees. For a moment, you feel seen not as a recruit, but as a person. Then he says quietly, "You owe me now." And that's the pivot where gratitude turns into a leash. It's hard to describe to an outsider how complicated these bonds could be. The Spartans believed a young warrior learned discipline not just through pain, but through imitation. You mirror your inspirer's walk, speech, and habits until you move like his echo. Over time, that imitation blurs into devotion. It's efficient. A soldier who would die for one man will die for the city that approved the connection. The trick was never about love. It was about scalability. In the evening, stories drift through the barracks. They speak of Achilles and Patroclus, the ideal pair, not as lovers in the Athenian sense, but as two flames that shared the same wick. The message is clear: devotion, not sentiment, wins wars. Still, the older boys whisper that some bonds cross invisible lines, that affection becomes ownership. The instructors don't stop it. They call it natural, as long as it makes you tougher, not weaker. The paradox is baked into the system. Feel deeply, but never show softness. Form attachment, but never need it. One night you wake to hear your inspirer's voice, outside low and steady, reciting a prayer to Ares. He mentions your name. It's oddly moving hearing yourself woven into a warrior's plea. Yet something inside you resists. You realize you've become both his project and his reflection. If he wins glory, you're part of his legacy. If you fail, he's shamed. It's less mentorship, more mutual captivity. Occasionally, an instructor will remind everyone that the bond is sacred. That word does heavy lifting here. Sacred means beyond question, beyond definition, beyond comfort. The Spartans had a knack for turning human complexity into ritual simplicity. To them, the inspirer system wasn't strange, it was insurance. In battle, men who had trained in pairs fought harder because shame and love pulled in the same direction. If the gods wanted loyalty, Sparta wanted dividends. Still, not all bonds are equal. Some inspirers are kind, offering wisdom like a shield. Others are cruel, testing your limits to see if you'll crack. One famous example is Lysander, the future admiral, who was said to mentor his young charges with icy perfectionism. His students learned endurance not from comfort, but from constant scrutiny. Centuries later, his name still echoes as both hero and cautionary tale. If you could time travel and show a Spartan psychologist what we now know about trauma bonding, they'd probably nod approvingly and ask, how do you weaponize that? The city's genius was psychological more than physical. The agoge didn't just build soldiers, it manufactured emotional architecture sturdy enough to outlive empathy. And yet sometimes you catch glimpses of something fragile under all the training. During a storm, your inspirer lets you stand close to share his cloak. He doesn't speak, but you can feel his heartbeat calm as thunder behind the ribs. For 1 second, you think maybe this is what connection means. Then the lightning flashes, and you remember even tenderness here serves a function. It keeps you loyal long enough to fight without hesitation. So you keep walking the line between guidance and control, between affection and obedience. The line isn't drawn in chalk, it's drawn in silence. And Sparta thrives on silence. Because silence doesn't question, doesn't accuse, doesn't remember. You're learning the first unwritten rule of the agoge: if you must feel, feel quietly. The first time you bleed for applause, you realize Sparta has turned pain into a kind of theater. The stage is the temple of Artemis or Thea. Its columns lit by torchlight, its altar crusted with old sacrifices and fresh fear. You stand barefoot with the others, ribs visible, hands clenched, heartbeat loud enough to echo off the stone. Around you the crowd hums, not solemn, not sympathetic, but eager. They've come to watch the diamastegosis, the ritual flogging that transforms pain into public proof of virtue. The priestess lifts her hand. The air smells of sweat, honey cakes, and anticipation. When the first lash cracks, it doesn't just slice your skin. It slices the air, a clean, theatrical sound. The crowd cheers as if courage were a sport. Somewhere behind them, your inspirer watches, eyes sharp as bronze. You tell yourself that if you don't flinch, maybe you'll see pride flicker across his face. That's the real reward, recognition disguised as glory. The diamastegosis began as a sacrifice to Artemis, meant to honor endurance and purify courage. But by your time, it's more carnival than ceremony. Foreign visitors come to gape at Spartan boys who stand stoic while blood streaks their backs like war paint. Historians later call it ritualized sadism. Spartans called it education. They believed endurance was contagious, that by watching others withstand agony, citizens absorbed fortitude through their eyes. Imagine a society so obsessed with discipline it treats agony like a spectator sport. Then again, you've seen modern crowds cheer in stadiums for boxers, bull riders, even those absurd endurance challenges on TV. Maybe humanity never outgrew its appetite for watching someone else hurt beautifully. The whip's rhythm becomes your metronome. You don't count the lashes. Counting would make the pain linear, measurable, escapable. Instead, you drift somewhere between shock and meditation. The priestess chants. The crowd swells. At some point, the noise stops being noise. It's music, and you are its drum. If you pass out, you'll wake up shamed. If you stay standing, you'll join the unspoken pantheon of boys who didn't cry. Later, when your wounds are washed with cold water, the instructor nods. That nod feels like a medal. No parchment, no statue, just one small gesture saying, "You did not fail the theater of pain." You almost laugh at the absurdity how civilization can sculpt brutality into ritual and still call it holiness. But Sparta believed the gods valued spectacle as much as mortals did. And maybe they were right. The same philosophy seeps into daily life. Pain is the universal tutor. The whip merely dramatizes what hunger, exhaustion, and humiliation already teach you in smaller installments. If the city could tax suffering, it would have built marble temples with your back's contributions. The agoge's brilliance lies in its consistency. Every discomfort has a script. You stub your toe. Endure silently. You're mocked by older boys. Laugh along as if mockery were mentorship. The system runs on quiet applause for self-discipline, a feedback loop so efficient it could power an empire of stoics. There's a strange freedom in the predictability of it all. You stop fearing pain the way a sailor stops fearing waves. It's just part of the scenery. Some boys even compete to out-endure each other, transforming the body into a scoreboard. You see one older with scars like map lines across his shoulders. He wears them proudly, his biography written in welts. He tells you pain is proof that you've met the gods halfway. You nod, pretending to understand, though. A small voice inside whispers, or maybe it's proof that they've stopped visiting altogether. Public endurance becomes a kind of currency. Mothers boast about sons who never flinched. Fathers nod gravely, as if resilience were hereditary. You hear tales of boys who died under the whip, praised for smiling until the end. The city calls them blessed. You wonder whether Artemis ever asked for such devotion, or if the priests simply decided that divine will always matches civic convenience. At night, you lie on your reed mat, tracing the fresh scabs across your back, counting them like stars. Pain, you discover, has texture. It can hum, sting, or ache in minor keys. You find a dark humor in it. If you survive this, you could probably survive anything. War, famine, even marriage. It's almost comforting to know the worst pain is rehearsed pain. You start seeing how this theater shapes every Spartan instinct. Soldiers later march into battle expecting wounds, not fearing them. The agoge ensures no one panics at the sight of blood because everyone has donated some. Even laughter carries a note of defiance. When a comrade stumbles during drills, someone calls out, "Artemis missed," and everyone grins. It's gallows humor, but it works. You realize that sarcasm in Sparta is another form of armor. Occasionally an outsider from another Greek city visits and marvels at your discipline. They mutter words like inhuman, magnificent, terrifying. You smile faintly, thinking it's all three. And that's the secret. The agoge doesn't aim to make heroes, it aims to make contradictions that function. Brave cowards, obedient rebels, tender stoics. You're all walking paradoxes that bleed efficiently and think collectively. And yet in the quiet after the crowds disperse, something in you aches, not your back, but deeper. You remember that first day when they told you to forget yourself. Maybe this is what they meant to transform the self into an audience member, applauding your own pain. It's a disturbing kind of enlightenment, realizing you've been both performer and spectator all along. You drift to sleep that night, with the rhythmic echo of the whip still in your ears. Strangely, it's almost soothing now, like a lullaby composed by discipline itself. You don't dream of freedom. You dream of applause. You wake one dawn to a whisper that tonight is different. Not another beating, not another drill. Tonight you hunt in the dark. The older boys call it crypteia, but they don't explain. They only grin, that half grin. Spartans have mastered the one that says, "You'll understand once you survive." You don't ask questions. In Sparta, curiosity has shorter legs than obedience. By sunset, a small group of you gather beyond the city walls. Barefoot, cloaked in black, no armor, no torches, just knives and silence. The instructor's voice is low, almost fatherly. The gods see everything. But tonight, they will look away. It's the kind of phrase that sounds noble until you realize it's permission to do whatever the city doesn't want publicly recorded. The hunt isn't for animals. It's for helots, the enslaved people who farm Spartan land. You're told they're the city's perpetual enemy, a population too numerous to trust, too useful to free. Each year the ephors declare war on them, so killing won't count as murder. You're told this is a sacred duty, a way to test courage and loyalty. You nod because everyone else does. But inside the words twist like vines. You can feel the unease growing where conscience should have been trained out of you. The night is cold and dry. The moon hides behind thin clouds as if ashamed. You move through olive groves and vineyards, every rustle amplified by your heartbeat. The older boys signal with bird calls. You copy them, your breath shallow. You spot shadows moving in the distance, helots perhaps. Just farmers returning home late. The order passes down the line. Strike quickly, leave no noise. You hesitate. They look like people, not targets. You remember one helot who sometimes slipped you figs when the guards weren't watching. But hesitation has no translation in Spartan Greek. So you do what's expected. The knife flashes, the moment collapses, and silence becomes heavier than sound. You tell yourself it's duty. The others nod approvingly. You've just taken your first life, and no one will speak of it again. In the Agoge, silence is both shield and confession. Historians will later argue about the crypteia. Some will call it a secret police, others an initiation ritual. Maybe it was both a test of stealth cruelty and psychological obedience. To walk barefoot through enemy fields at night, to kill without anger, to return without guilt, that was the Spartan holy trinity of control. It's unsettling genius. The city teaches you not to question morality by forcing you to act before you can define it. At dawn, you return to the barracks with dirt on your cloak and something nameless on your conscience. The instructor looks at each of you, reading faces for cracks. He smiles faintly when he reaches you. "You've done your part," he says. "Now you belong." The words land like a brand. Belonging here means complicity shared equally. There's comfort in that terrible magnetic comfort. You try not to think about what the helots think. Maybe they whisper about you in their huts, calling you shadows or ghosts. Maybe they tell their children stories to make sense of why the fields grow redder each year. But you're not allowed to think about that. The Agoge trains empathy out of you like rust from a blade. The only acceptable feeling left is pride, even if it feels hollow. Over time, the crypteia becomes mythic. Some claim the bravest graduates could live in the wild for weeks, striking like phantoms and vanishing again. They say those who returned alive were ready for any battlefield. You start to see the logic. The crypteia isn't about killing others. It's about killing hesitation inside yourself. The city can't risk soldiers who hesitate. Sparta's strength lies in instant obedience, not moral debate. Still, the memory lingers. You find yourself glancing at the fields differently now. Every shadow could be a ghost, every gust of wind a whisper from the earth, asking, "Do you remember?" You push the thought away. The agoge has no syllabus for guilt. Back at the barracks, the others brag quietly. Not about kills, but about composure, who stayed calmest, who moved most silently. You join in, your voice steady though your hands tremble slightly under the cloak. The city measures worth by how little the face moves when the soul does. That night you dream of running barefoot through a field that never ends. Something chases you. But when you look back, it's yourself, only older, scarred eyes empty. You wake with a start, sweat cold on your skin. Outside, the rooster crows signaling another day of drills, another round of lessons disguised as survival. And so the cryptia becomes one more layer of your education. Not a secret punishment, not exactly a crime, just another stitch in the fabric of Spartan identity. The city has perfected the art of moral camouflage. By morning you'll laugh again, spar again, bleed again, and pretend that night never happened. But somewhere deep down, a part of you knows Sparta's real genius isn't discipline. It's convincing every soul it breaks that the sound of the crack was applause. You don't talk about the crypteia, not even in whispers. But silence in Sparta isn't absence, it's architecture. It holds everything up. What you've done now qualifies you for another layer of initiation. One without witnesses, one that doesn't appear on any bronze tablet or carved law. It's called the Brotherhood, though nobody dares say its name aloud. You only know it's real because the men who belong to it don't blink the same way as the rest. It begins quietly, like everything sacred in Sparta. One night after mess, an older warrior nods for you to follow. You expect more drills, maybe another test of endurance. Instead, he leads you to a narrow corridor lit by oil lamps, their flames trembling as if nervous to be part of this. At the end stands a door carved with a single letter, Lambda, the mark of Lacedaemon. He knocks once, twice, then waits. You hear the muffled shuffle of sandals, a bolt sliding, and the door opens into shadow. Inside, the air is heavy with the smell of iron and tallow. You see maybe 10 men cloaked and unarmed standing in a semicircle. No ranks, no armor, just eyes watching. The man who brought you in says simply, "He has walked the night." The others nod. One steps forward, places his hand on your shoulder and says, "Then he knows how silence feels." That's your welcome. No speeches, no oaths written in marble. Just acknowledgement, the most dangerous currency in Sparta. The Brotherhood, you soon learn, isn't officially part of the agoge, yet every graduate wants to be noticed by it. It's like being invited behind the curtain of the play you've been acting in your whole life. Their purpose isn't recorded, but everyone senses it. They keep the city's unspoken rules running, smoothing the rough edges of the law where paperwork would be too loud. If Sparta has secrets, and it does, they live here. In this shadow order, loyalty replaces logic. You're taught that questions corrode unity. When something must be done quietly, an inconvenient dissent, a messenger who talks too freely, the Brotherhood acts and the city sleeps undisturbed. You realize the crypteia was only rehearsal. This is the graduate course in invisibility. Sometimes they meet at the edge of the Rites River, where the reeds grow tall enough to hide a gathering. The moon turns the water silver, and they speak in phrases half proverb, half threat. One man murmurs, "The state survives because we forget what it costs." Another answers, "Forgetting is our offering." You stand among them, pretending you understand. It feels like religion stripped of gods, only faith in function remains. You start to recognize members by subtle cues, the way they pause before answering, the faint scar on a forearm, the habit of touching the chest before crossing thresholds. These are unspoken passwords. When they pass each other in the agora, they exchange no greeting, just a fractional tilt to the chin. Outsiders would never notice. But once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Sparta is full of invisible nods, little acknowledgments that the city runs on agreements never written down. One night, an older brother, his name lost to history as designed, tells you Sparta endures because we choose memory carefully. He explains that history is a weapon, and like all weapons, it must be sharpened at one end and blunted at the other. The stories told to the youth are the polished side heroism, sacrifice order. The Brotherhood holds the blunt end, the parts you must never name, but must remember in silence. If both ends are held, he says, the weapon never breaks. You begin to see how this quiet machinery keeps the illusion of purity intact. Publicly, the city worships simplicity, equality among peers, devotion to virtue. Privately, it relies on a web of watchers, ensuring the illusion never frays. Every utopia has a backstage crew. Sparta just trained its crew to believe their invisibility was holiness. It's ironic, really. The rest of Greece will later romanticize Spartan virtue, minimalism, discipline, courage, never realizing those traits were maintained by a network of people who erased problems before poets could notice them. The Brotherhood's existence will never make it into Homeric epics, but it's the ghostwriter behind them all. Sometimes when a new member joins, there's a small ceremony by torchlight. They stand in a circle place, their hands on the earth, and swear to guard the city's silence. You do the same, repeating words you barely understand. The flames crackle, shadows leap like dancers, and the night feels heavier afterward, as if the air itself were listening. You can almost sense the city breathing through you, using your lungs as its own. Days pass, and you function as usual. Train march, eat, obey. But now every routine feels layered. The mess hall, chatter, the temple songs, even children's laughter. It's all choreography. You know the quiet men at the edges keep it balanced, pruning disorder before it sprouts. It's a strange sort of comfort, realizing that control is both the disease and the cure here. Yet sometimes when you catch your reflection in the river, you wonder which version of yourself is truer, the boy who once feared the dark or the man who now serves it. You remember that night in the fields, the moonless sky, the silent strike, and you see the pattern now. Every rite has been preparing you for this obedience without witness. That's Sparta's hidden genius. Its real warriors aren't the ones who shout in battle, but the ones who vanish afterward, carrying secrets heavier than shields. And so, the Brotherhood becomes part of your pulse. You move through the streets as both citizen and ghost protector and accomplice. The rest of Greece will someday call Sparta mysterious, ruthless, efficient. They won't be wrong. They just won't know that the mystery was deliberate, the ruthlessness ritualized, the efficiency rehearsed. You do. And knowing makes you part of the silence. Perfection in Sparta isn't achieved, it's performed. You learn this the hard way. Every gesture, every glance, every heartbeat must look effortless, even when your ribs ache and your mind screams. The older warriors call it to kalos, the beauty of control. To be Spartan isn't simply to endure, it's to make endurance look graceful. That's the cruel poetry of the city. Pain must always pose for the camera. even when the camera is a god's indifferent eye. From the moment you wake, performance begins. You walk with posture measured to the inch shoulders, square eyes steady, no slouching, no sighing. A true Spartan should appear sculpted from calmness itself. If your cloak slips, you fix it silently. If your foot bleeds, you hide it in dust. Perfection here isn't an act of excellence, it's camouflage. The flaw isn't that you're imperfect. The flaw is letting anyone notice. You start to see it everywhere, the choreography of composure. At mealtime, the way men tear bread neatly, never too greedily. At training, how even failure is staged when you fall. You must rise with a smirk, as if gravity lost politely. The instructors tell you that control over the body leads to control over fear. What they don't mention is how control over fear becomes control over truth. After a while, you can't tell which part of you is real and which part rehearsed. Spartan society is obsessed with masks long before theaters made them famous. The city wears one collectively, the mask of perfection, emotionless, invincible. The cost is individuality, but no one dares mention that. Emotions here are treated like weeds. They're tolerated only if trimmed neatly. Joy must look modest, sorrow invisible. Even laughter has a quota. If someone laughs too loud, an elder raises an eyebrow and the sound dies instantly. You learn to laugh with your eyes instead. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of what lies behind that perfection. A soldier polishing his spear a little too long after hearing bad news. A mother standing still at a funeral, knuckles white under her cloak. A boy who bites his lip so hard during training, you can taste the iron of his restraint in the air. None of them cry. The tears have been bred out or buried deep enough that only the gods remember how they felt. You can't help comparing it in your imagination to the modern world where perfection has simply changed its costume. Back then it was posture and scars. Now it's filters and curated smiles. Same performance, different stage. The Spartan boy, posing in the barracks, mirrors the influencer posing on a screen, both terrified that authenticity might be mistaken for weakness. It's comforting in a dark way to realize humanity's tricks don't expire. The public scrutiny is constant. During festivals, you march in lines before the elders. They study your stride like a text looking for punctuation errors. Too fast, and you're arrogant. Too slow, and you're lazy. Even the tilt of your head becomes commentary on your soul. You feel like a statue being inspected for cracks. One wrong expression can undo months of invisible labor. It's exhausting, but you can't show exhaustion either. The women are no different. Spartan girls train race and sing in public contests, expected to embody discipline as dazzlingly as the men. They hurl sharp jokes at the boys, a verbal sparring match disguised as flirtation. Their confidence is state-approved, but only within limits. Everyone performs the entire city a stage lit by the sun and judged by ancestors. You begin to realize that perfection isn't about strength, it's about suppression. The agauge has taught you to store emotion like contraband hidden where it won't be found. But pressure accumulates. Late at night, lying on your reed mat, you hear boys mutter in their sleep names, prayers, half-lost memories of mothers. You pretend not to hear. By morning, the same boys wake blank-faced, ready to act again. Your inspirer once told you, if you must feel, feel in secret. You understand now, emotions are for private rehearsal, not public performance. To keep the mask uncracked, you must schedule your vulnerability carefully, like an athlete schedules water breaks. Even affection becomes rationed. You greet comrades with brief nods, gestures that mean more than words could survive. One day an F4 visits the barracks to inspect the new recruits. His face is carved from authority. his voice quiet but final. He walks past each of you, pausing to adjust a shoulder here, a gaze there. When he reaches you, he murmurs, "Control is a kind of faith. You're not sure if it's praise or warning. Maybe both." The Spartans believed that self-mastery was divine service, that the gods favored those who never let chaos leak from their eyes. It's strange, isn't it? A society that worships control ends up ruled by fear. You sense it under the marble, everyone terrified of imperfection, of being the crack that spoils the sculpture. And yet the city keeps shining, its citizens shining too, like stars too proud to flicker. You sometimes wonder what would happen if someone broke. The act laughed too loud, wept openly, refused to hide the tremor in their hand. Would the world collapse, or would it simply exhale, finally allowed to breathe again? But you never ask out loud. Sparta doesn't punish rebellion with exile. It punishes it with silence, the kind that lasts long enough for the city to forget you ever existed. So you keep polishing your mask, practicing your stillness, smiling when required. Inside, though, a question begins to echo, soft, persistent, almost tender. If perfection is all that's left of you, what was taken to build it? The night they send you into the wilderness, there are no drums, no speeches, no farewells. It begins with the simplest command strip. Your cloak, your belt, even your sandals, everything that marked you as a Spartan must stay behind. The instructor's face is unreadable as he says, "If the city made you the wild, we'll test what's left." That's the final stage of the agoge solitude sharpened to a blade. You step beyond the boundary stones naked, except for the dust and your breath. The stars stretch above like cold watchers. Somewhere behind you the city walls glimmer faintly, the sound of singing fading into wind. You realize how small Sparta looks from this distance. It is the first time you've ever seen it without being inside it. And the sight feels almost disloyal, like glimpsing your own reflection before it remembers to pose. The wilderness is not kind. You've been trained for this, how to find water by licking dew from reeds, how to catch a hare with your bare hands, how to sleep light as a shadow. Still theory is polite, reality bites. The cold digs into your bones, your stomach growls in open protest, and the silence seems to listen too closely. Every rustle sounds like an accusation. The first day passes in measured hunger. You remember the instructor's words, "Pain is memory's anchor." He meant it metaphorically, but right now it's literal. Your body records everything, the sting of thorns, the rasp of your heartbeat, the ache in your legs that feels ancient. You think of the helots who live out here year-round doing this not for ritual, but for survival. The thought humbles you more than any sermon could. By the second night, the line between test and hallucination blurs. You see shapes in the trees that might be gods, or just exhaustion wearing a mask. You murmur prayers to Artemis Ares, anyone listening. The sky offers no reply, only a deeper kind of quiet. You realize that silence out here is different from silence in the barracks. In the city, silence was discipline. Here, it's something closer to mercy. You find a cave near a stream and make it your fortress. You remember childhood stories of young Leonidas doing the same, alone, unarmed, fasting, until his body learned what his spirit refused to forget. You wonder if he felt this same cocktail of fear and pride. The stories always skip that part. Heroes in the making are never shown shivering. Each night the forest sings differently. Sometimes it hums with insects, sometimes with wolves. Once you catch a boar's reflection in the moonlight, its tusks glowing faintly, its breath steaming. You freeze, hand gripping a rock, ready to fight or flee. But the creature only stares, then turns away, uninterested. You laugh softly. Even beasts seem unimpressed by your training. Maybe that's the point, to remind you you're still mortal after all the rituals tried to convince you otherwise. Days blend together. Hunger dulls thought until your mind becomes a metronome ticking between breath and heartbeat. You start to remember faces, your mothers, the instructors, the helot in the fields, inspirers' steady eyes, and realize each one represents a piece of the city still living inside you. You thought you'd been stripped bare, but no. You carry Sparta in your bones, like a watermark. Even alone, you're never unobserved. Then one afternoon, it rains. The first drop feels like a benediction. You tilt your head back and let the sky baptize you. The mud clings to your legs, the cold stings your skin, and for the first time in years, you laugh without permission. The sound startles a flock of birds, and their flight feels like applause. For a fleeting second, you're not a soldier, not an initiate, not anyone's project, just a creature alive under falling water. By the seventh day, you understand the test's true shape. It isn't about survival. It's about silence again. The wilderness teaches you what the city could not, that control isn't strength unless it can endure solitude. A man who obeys under watch is disciplined. A man who obeys himself when unseen is complete. That's the paradox Sparta chases like a shadow. When they finally come for you, it's without ceremony. A pair of warriors appear at dawn, their faces expressionless. They hand you back your cloak, but not your name. You've been measured, one says, and you still exist. It sounds like both praise and warning. You follow them back toward the city, feet heavy, heart strangely light. Crossing back into Sparta, the air feels thicker, rehearsed. The sounds of drills, the smell of oil and bronze. It's all the same, yet you sense a difference in yourself. You've met silence on its own terms, and now the city's noise feels foreign, like someone else's song playing in your head. You catch your reflection in a bronze shield, the same face, but older, rougher eyes, quieter. Maybe this is what they wanted, a man who has looked into nothing and returned calm. Later that night, as you eat your first warm meal in days, the others slap your back. Congratulate you, make jokes about your smell. You smile, but somewhere inside something stays still, listening to the echo of the rain, remembering the feeling of laughter that didn't need permission. You wonder if you'll ever laugh like that again. When you return to the city, the cheers sound strange in your ears, too loud, too polished, as if joy has been choreographed. They call it the Feast of the Victors, but the real feast is the sight of obedience served on silver platters. The agoge has ended technically. You've passed every trial, hunger, pain, silence, solitude. Yet you know deep down that this isn't an ending. It's a costume change. Now you must play the role of the perfected Spartan, the citizen warrior who owes every breath to the state. The feast takes place in the mess hall, the secession where each man contributes his share of barley, wine, and cheese. You're seated among the older warriors, their faces weathered but calm. The black broth steams from a clay bowl in front of you, so famous, so dreaded. You've eaten worse in the wilderness, but still you brace yourself. The first taste burns like punishment and pride at once. Around you, laughter rises low, restrained, the kind of laughter that knows it's being watched. The conversation flows like measured wine. They talk of campaigns, of the way the Persian archers once blotted out the sun with arrows of kings and omens, and politics whispered under the guise of jokes. You listen carefully, learning that here words are weapons with dull edges. The trick is to strike without cutting. Every sentence hides a second meaning. You start to notice that even their humor has discipline. It never strays, never softens the city's image. When your turn comes to speak, you thank your elders, your instructors, the gods. You almost thank yourself, but catch the impulse just in time. Self-congratulation, even after survival, is indecent here. The man beside you grins, slaps your back, and mutters, "Now you can serve properly." You smile back, though part of you wonders what properly really means anymore. The ritual of the feast stretches deep into the night. Songs of victory echo in that compressed, rhythmic chant unique to Sparta. The men pound their cups on the tables in time, each thud a heartbeat of the collective. You remember the same rhythm from your childhood drills, the cadence of belonging. And yet now that you've survived the wilderness, you can feel the difference once it carried you. Now it contains you. After the feast, the initiates are paraded before the elders and the ephors. They inspect you not for wounds or skill, but for composure. A true Spartan must return from trial, neither proud nor broken. One elder studies your face and says he has learned silence. It's the highest compliment they can give. You bow, knowing it's also a kind of sentence. Silence will follow you everywhere now. An invisible armor and a quiet prison. When dawn breaks, the celebrations melt into routine. You are assigned your unit, your place in the phalanx. Training begins anew. This time not as a boy among boys, but as a cog in the most disciplined war machine in the ancient world. Shoulder to shoulder, shield against shield. You march until your legs forget what freedom felt like. The instructors say each man's shield protects the man next to him. It sounds noble. It's also literal. You fight not to live, but so the next man's death isn't meaningless. The older soldiers tell stories of Thermopylae, where Leonidas and his 300 stood against the Persian tide. You're expected to glow with pride at the mention of their names. And you do, at least outwardly. But a small voice in you, the one you met in the wilderness, asks whether glory is just another mask. You push the thought aside. Sparta doesn't train philosophers. In quieter moments, you notice the other victors. Their eyes look older than their faces, their smiles too practiced. You share the same invisible fatigue, the same careful stillness. You recognize the brotherhood in that exhaustion. It's not the wild, laughing camaraderie of other Greek cities. It's a solidarity carved from shared silence. The kind that doesn't need words, because words would only bruise the illusion. A few weeks later, you're summoned to guard duty at the Temple of Apollo. The night air is cool. The stars look familiar again. Standing watch, you think about everything the Agoge has demanded from you. The city promised perfection, and in a way, it delivered. You can endure anything now. Hunger, pain, loneliness, fear. But perfection feels strangely hollow, like armor with no one left inside it. As dawn rises, golden light spills across the rooftops. The city stirs, the clang of training fields, the smell of bread from the women's ovens, the distant laughter of children who haven't yet been chosen. For a fleeting second, you envy them. You wish someone had warned them that survival here isn't about defeating weakness, it's about erasing tenderness. A messenger approaches with orders. Tomorrow you march east to join a campaign in Arcadia. You nod, accepting it without thought. That's the brilliance of Sparta's design. By the time you're ready to question, there's no time left to answer. The city moves, and you move with it, as though both of you share one heartbeat. That night, as you polish your shield, you catch your reflection and barely recognize the face staring back. It's calm, poised, invincible, the perfect Spartan mask. But behind it, you can still hear the faint echo of rain in the wilderness, the sound of laughter that didn't need permission. You hold onto it quietly, like contraband hope. Tomorrow you'll march. Tonight you just breathe. For now, that's rebellion enough. Years later, when you stand on the city walls and watch the sun set over the Eurotas River, you finally understand what Sparta took and what it gave in return. The bronze gleams, the hymns rise, and everything looks perfect from a distance. Tourists from other polis would call it noble, even divine, a civilization so disciplined it outlasted its own doubts. But you've lived inside it. You know that perfection has a cost, and that cost was humanity carefully traded away in installments. The Agoj made you indestructible, or so it seemed. Your body is lean, your reflexes exact, your speech concise to the point of poetry. Yet the longer you live, the more you realize what those refinements erased. You can stand in formation for hours without shifting a muscle. But you can't hold your child without feeling clumsy. You can face death without blinking. But you can't look grief in the eye without turning to stone. That's the hidden tax of Spartan glory. Invincibility charged against intimacy. The younger boys still march past every morning, their cloaks bright crimson against the pale dust. You watch them with a strange tenderness, knowing each one will soon be carved down to the same hard shape. They look proud now, eager, shouting chants about courage and unity. You remember shouting them too? The rhythm feels ancient, unstoppable, but the song's beauty is its trap. It drowns out the quieter voice that asks, "Who are you?" when no one commands you. As the years pass, you serve in wars that will make poets famous and widows anonymous. You hold the line in Arcadia and Boeotia, maybe even at Plataea. You bleed in perfect rhythm beside men who never flinch. Victory feels mechanical, defeat unspeakable. When comrades fall, you lift their shields and keep marching because that's what the code demands. The city never taught you how to mourn, only how to continue. When peace finally comes, it feels wrong, like silence after too much music. You walk through the agora and realize you don't quite fit among the merchants and philosophers. The laughter of children sounds foreign, the songs too soft. You see your reflection in a merchant's polished bowl and think for the first time that maybe you've become exactly what the city wanted. Efficient, unbreakable, forgetful. One evening, an old comrade visits. You share wine and brittle laughter. He tells you his son died in training, whipped too hard at the altar of Artemis Orthia. You murmur the usual blessings, but his eyes hold something new, doubt. "Do you ever wonder," he asks quietly, "if we were made brave or just made numb?" You have no answer. Silence has been your companion for so long that even truth feels like treason. The next morning, you walk to the edge of the river. The same river where boys once swore oaths, where you first saw the brotherhood meet under flickering torches. The reeds whisper, the water moves as it always has, patient and unjudging. You think of everything the Agoj taught how to fight, to endure, to obey, and realize it never taught how to live beyond service. Perhaps it was never meant to. You bend scoop a handful of water and watch it slip through your fingers. It sparkles in the sunlight, gone before you can drink. That's Sparta's lesson in miniature. What you hold too tightly disappears faster. You remember the laughter you once heard in the rain during your trial, that brief rebellion of joy. It feels like a different life, a dream left behind in the wilderness. History will call your city mighty. Philosophers will praise its laws, its order, its clarity. Generals will envy its discipline. None will write about the quiet hollowness in its citizens' chests, the hearts that learned to beat softly so the world could not hear them break. You know it, though. You've carried that silence all your life, like an invisible medal pinned where no one can see. And yet, strangely, you don't regret everything. Sparta, for all its cruelty, gave you one thing worth keeping: an unshakable understanding of the human threshold. You've seen how far endurance can stretch before it snaps, how loyalty can glow and burn in the same breath. You've learned that control can protect or poison depending on how it's used. Those lessons, painful, precise, are your true inheritance. As the sun dips low, the city hums behind you. Boys train women, sing, elders argue softly in the stoa. Sparta lives on, proud and unbending, unaware of its own fragility. You close your eyes and breathe. Maybe someday another world will rise, one that values tenderness as much as strength. One that teaches courage without cruelty. But that's not your world. Yours was built on silence, sculpted by fear and polished by pride. Still you whisper a prayer to Artemis, to Ares, to anyone still listening for the next generation. May they endure less beautifully and live more honestly. And when night falls, you finally allow yourself to exhale, not as a soldier, not as a Spartan, but as something rarer, someone who has survived the perfection that was supposed to save him. Before you drift off, let's turn our gaze from the warriors to the women who shaped them. Beneath the bronze and blood of Sparta's legends, a quieter power moved the mothers, wives, and priestesses whose secret rituals forged discipline long before the battlefield. Now you'll uncover the secret rituals of Spartan women. Power behind the warriors. They say Sparta was built by warriors, but that's only half the story. The other half, quieter, yet infinitely sharper, wore linen instead of bronze and ruled from the shadows of marble courtyards. You arrive in Sparta expecting the clang of shields. But what greets you instead is the thrum of sandals against polished stone, the rhythm of women who know that real power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums. You can almost smell the oil and crushed thyme in the air, the faint salt of the Eurotas River nearby, and the dryness that cracks the earth into patterns that look suspiciously like battle maps. The men might be away training or fighting, but the city itself, the pulse of Sparta, belongs to the women. They glide through open courtyards with heads high, their chitons hitched just enough to reveal calves, hardened by running, their laughter sharp as a javelin tip. You sense immediately these are not quiet homemakers. They are conductors in a symphony of discipline. Sparta, for all its obsession with warfare, was never a land ruled by men alone. Every Spartan boy sent off to the Agoge, the brutal training school, left behind a mother who had once endured her own version of battle. And when those boys returned scarred and hardened, it was these same mothers who could look them in the eye and ask, "Did you return with your shield, or on it?" It wasn't cruelty. It was doctrine. In Sparta, weakness was more dangerous than the Persian army. You notice how few walls separate the women's quarters from the open air. Unlike in Athens, where women are hidden behind shutters and silent, Spartan women move freely. They can own property, inherit estates, and oversee farms. Some historians estimate they controlled nearly 40% of Sparta's land. Imagine that while most Greek women couldn't step outside without a male escort, Spartan women were managing entire economies. If life in Athens was a cage lined with scrolls, and gossip, life in Sparta was a track field lined with authority. Still, it wasn't all olive oil and autonomy. Freedom came with a price: constant expectation. You're reminded of modern CEOs, the kind who post motivational quotes about discipline while secretly drinking 3 espressos to survive the day. Spartan women lived that kind of relentless performance, minus the coffee and the hashtags. Their value wasn't measured by charm or beauty, but by how effectively they produced strong citizens, physically, morally, and politically. The philosopher Plutarch, centuries later, would collect stories about these women, both admiring and bewildered by them. He tells of Queen Gorgo, wife of King Leonidas, who once answered a foreign woman asking why Spartan women were the only ones who could rule men. Gorgo smiled and said, "Because we are the only ones who give birth to men." Brutal, yes, but also poetic in a Spartan sort of way. You glance around and see that everything about their daily life is designed for strength. No ornate jewelry, no perfume-heavy rituals like in Corinth or Thebes. Their rituals are practical washing newborns, in wine to test vitality, sun-drying infants to harden their skin, feeding them plain barley and goat's milk instead of sweets. Even the lullabies sound like pep talks for future soldiers. It's less sleep, baby, sleep, and more stand tall, my little spear. Of course, not everyone approved. Other Greeks found Spartan customs scandalous. Athenian playwrights mocked their women for being too bold, too visible, too outspoken. One comedy describes Spartan women as men in skirts, their voices echoing across gymnasiums like war horns. But here inside Sparta's city walls, no one laughs. This is a culture where physical perfection and civic duty blur together, and where silence is reserved for cowards. You wander through the agora past bronze statues of heroes and notice something peculiar. No statues of women. Yet their fingerprints are everywhere, in the polished shields, the disciplined youth, the grain shipments sent to the army. It's as if the entire city is an altar built upon their invisible labor. There's a saying among the moderns: behind every successful man stands a strong woman. In Sparta, that was literal. Every hoplite who stood firm at Thermopylae did so because he'd been raised by a woman who could outstare a lion. It's ironic this society worshipped war, yet the fiercest endurance was often found in the homes, not the battlefields. Even the gods seemed to mirror this balance. Sparta revered Artemis Orthia, the goddess of childbirth and endurance, whose temple rituals required both pain and composure. Young boys were flogged there during initiation rites, but the presiding women, stoic watchful, were part of the ceremony's moral compass. The goddess demanded that courage begin at birth, and the women ensured that it stayed alive until death. By now, the hum of female command is impossible to ignore. You realize that to understand Sparta's military machine, you have to study its unseen engineers, the mothers, wives, and daughters who shaped men before the state claimed them. Without their discipline, the warrior's valor would collapse into chaos. You can almost hear the wind whisper through the olive trees, carrying fragments of ancient advice: train them young, love them strong, never fear the storm you raised. And suddenly, you understand Sparta's women were not just the power behind the warriors. They were the architects of the entire Spartan soul. If you were born in Sparta, your first lullaby might have sounded suspiciously like a military order. From the moment your mother holds you up to the light, she isn't checking for dimples, she's checking for durability. Every newborn here faces inspection by the elders. If a baby looks frail or misshapen, it's carried not to a nursery, but to the foothills of Mount Taygetus, where nature makes the final decision. Brutal, absolutely. But in Sparta, sentimentality is considered a weakness, a luxury reserved for other Greeks. You, however, survive that first test. Your mother wraps you in coarse wool, rubs your limbs with olive oil, and starts the slow work of building a citizen made of iron. Spartan mothers were in many ways the first trainers their children would ever have. They hardened skin with cold baths, toughened the lungs with outdoor air, and discouraged crying. "Don't whimper," she would murmur, "or you'll sound like an Athenian." It's strange to think of motherhood as a kind of boot camp, but that's exactly what it was. Women here were told that their true honor lay not in embroidery or conversation, but in producing strong children, future warriors and mothers of warriors. Yet, this wasn't some quiet domestic duty. It was a national service. A Spartan mother was a sculptor carving the next generation from flesh and resolve. Still, don't mistake their world for bleakness. The mothers of Sparta weren't heartless. They were simply practical in a way that would make modern parenting books cry. When a Spartan boy left for war, his mother handed him his shield and said, "With it or on it." In other words, return victorious or die with honor. No pressure, right? But think about it. What kind of society makes that the measure of love? One where devotion to the state and devotion to family are the same thing. You see her now, your mother's shoulders squared, eyes sharp as a hawk's. She's not just a caretaker. She's an extension of the Spartan ethos. She's been trained to suppress fear the way a hoplite suppresses hesitation. Even in childbirth, Spartan women were admired for their composure. There are accounts of women delivering babies without a sound, rising moments later to attend to housework. A modern obstetrician would faint. A Spartan midwife would probably shrug. Archaeologists and historians have long puzzled over this balance. How could a society so famously male-dominated also produce women so respected? The answer lies in utility. Every element of Spartan life was designed for one goal: survival through strength. And in a city where men were constantly away training or fighting, women had to be strong enough to manage everything else. Weakness simply didn't fit the blueprint. Even their education reflected that. Spartan girls weren't confined indoors learning to weave. They were out running, wrestling, and throwing javelins. Mothers encouraged it, knowing that strong women made strong offspring. That's early genetics, Spartan style. Plutarch later wrote that women exercised so that their bodies would be firm and the fruit of their wombs strong. It sounds clinical today, but to them it was divine math. Health equals strength, and strength equals survival. You might chuckle imagining a modern mother applying these methods: morning sprints instead of lullabies, spear drills instead of playtime. It's absurd and yet strangely admirable. Spartan parenting could make even the strictest modern fitness influencer look soft. No sugar, no softness, no sleepovers, a Spartan mother might have said. You can almost hear her in your head. "Courage, darling. You can rest when you've conquered something." But don't be fooled into thinking women were just baby factories. Their influence reached further. By molding sons who worshipped discipline and daughters who embodied strength, they embedded their ideals deep into the national psyche. The courage that carried King Leonidas and his 300 men at Thermopylae began in the nursery, passed down not through military drills, but through bedtime stories told by women who believed fear was optional. There's a strange tenderness in that, isn't there? Love expressed not through softness, but through preparation. When you think about it, Spartan women loved like blacksmiths. They heated, hammered, and forged. And when the metal finally shone, they let it go to war. Modern mothers might slip a note in a lunchbox saying, "Be brave today." Spartan mothers sent the entire lunchbox to the afterlife, if necessary. You can almost picture her sitting by the hearth, now oil lamp flickering her face, half lit by firelight. She sharpens her spindle the way her husband sharpens his sword, both acts of creation. The crackle of the flames sounds like marching feet. Outside, the night hums with cicadas and the faint echo of distant training songs. She hums along, steady, calm, unafraid. Her strength isn't something you shout about. It's the quiet decision to keep standing when the world trembles. That decision begins here in the home. Every woven tunic, every cleaned blade, every stoic bedtime story is part of a grander choreography, the silent foundation of Sparta's might. You don't yet realize it, But in this city of warriors, the softest hands carry the hardest burdens. You wake to the sound of sandals slapping against dust. The sun hasn't yet burned through the morning haze, but already the air buzzes with shouts and laughter. You're no longer a baby wrapped in olive oil cloth. Now you're one of the Spartan girls who wrestle the wind. Every morning feels like a challenge issued by the gods themselves. There are no dolls here, no idle gossip, no lessons in modesty. Instead, you stretch your limbs, smear your arms with oil, and run barefoot through the red clay fields until your breath comes in gusts. Beside you, other girls shout taunts, daring you to jump higher, throw farther, laugh louder. The air smells of wild time and determination. Unlike in Athens, where girls learn embroidery while being told to lower their eyes, you learn how to hold a spear balance on one foot and shout victory hymns. For what you endure, for what you ask, for the sheer joy of existing as a Spartan girl who refuses to sit still. The city believes a strong woman produces strong children. But somewhere inside you realize it's more than that. Strength has become its own form of worship. Imagine a track meet with no audience, no medals, just the approving nods of older women who stand at the edge of the field, arms crossed, assessing your form. Their eyes are sharp, but you can tell they're proud. When one of them tosses a javelin, it flies farther than any you've seen. That's when you understand this isn't play. This is heritage. Your body is your first weapon, your first prayer, your first badge of belonging. You feel it in every muscle as you sprint across the Eurotas plain. The dust rises behind you like incense. There's rhythm to this training, a kind of rough beauty that would shock outsiders. Travelers from other Greek cities often wrote in disbelief about Spartan women, exercising publicly, wearing short tunics that revealed more leg than custom allowed. Scandalous, they said. Indecent. But here in Sparta, no one blinks. It isn't vanity. It's virtue. There's an unspoken lesson buried in all this running and wrestling. Control your body, and you'll control your fate. The girls laugh, tumble, and fall, but no one cries. The sting of scraped knees becomes a badge of honor. Sometimes one of you will race against the boys, and when you win, and you often do, their pride takes a small but significant hit. You grin, wiping sweat from your brow, and think, maybe the gods prefer balance after all. Aristotle once complained that Spartan women had too much freedom and ruled their men. Coming from a philosopher who thought women were incomplete humans, that's practically a compliment. He couldn't fathom a society where women spoke boldly in public-owned land and trained their bodies like athletes. But in Sparta, it makes perfect sense. The women aren't rebelling, they're refining the system. While other Greek city-states built walls, Sparta built people. You can almost hear your instructors shouting over the wind, "Run until your lungs burn clean." She's older, her voice rasped by years of shouting encouragements. Her gray hair whips behind her like a battle standard. When you stumble, she doesn't help you up. Instead, she nods at your scraped elbows and says, "Good. Now you look alive." There's humor in her words, but also truth. Pain here isn't punishment, it's participation. You're reminded of modern gym coaches with their relentless pep talks. No pain, no gain. Sparta invented that long before hashtags. And unlike today's wellness slogans, theirs wasn't about appearance. It was about preparation for every unpredictable turn life could throw: childbirth, siege, famine, heartbreak. The body trained for resilience becomes the mind's armor. Later, when the heat grows unbearable, you and your friends collapse by the riverbank. You trade jokes about who'll marry which soldier or who'll throw her discus farthest at the next festival. Someone begins to hum a hymn to Artemis or Thea, the goddess who blesses endurance. Her temple stands just across the river, modest yet powerful, surrounded by reeds that sing in the breeze. You find comfort in the idea that the goddess herself watches over your scraped knees and wild laughter. It's easy to forget how revolutionary this world is. Spartan girls are educated alongside boys, not in reading philosophy, but in learning courage, rhythm, and precision. You're taught to speak clearly, to command your voice like a soldier commands a sword. When you deliver a sharp remark that makes the boys flinch, an older woman claps once. That sound, a single proud clap, is the Spartan equivalent of applause. As the day ends, you lie in the dust, staring at the fading light. Your arms ache, your throat tastes of salt, but there's satisfaction humming beneath your ribs. You think of your mother, her stoic face softened just a little when you left that morning. You realize now what she meant when she said, "A strong woman carries no shield, she becomes one." Tomorrow you'll wake up sore but ready. The other girls will be waiting, the wind will be waiting, and the rhythm of Sparta will pull you forward again, unyielding, disciplined, free. The moon has replaced the sun, and Sparta feels like another world entirely. Shadows stretch long across the courtyards, and the air hums with something ancient, half prayer, half challenge. You're no longer a child of daylight games. Tonight you step into the chorus of the moon, where Spartan maidens dance with the rhythm of rebellion. You follow the others toward the sanctuary of Artemis or Thea, your feet tracing a path worn smooth by generations. The night smells of laurel leaves and river water, and a silver mist hangs low over the earth. Somewhere nearby, a flute begins to play soft at first, then sharper, like the whisper of steel unsheathing. The older women take their places bare feet, pressed against cool stone faces, turned upward to the stars. You and your peers form a circle around them. There's no priest, no sermon, only rhythm, breath, and the pulsing heartbeat of the city. It begins with a single clap, then another. Soon the sound grows layered with footfalls and sharp, synchronized cries. You move as one body, your skirts swirling your hair, unbound, your voice rising into the open night. Outsiders might call it dance. To you, it's communication. Each motion tells a story of strength, fertility, loyalty. This is how Spartan women honor both body and spirit, not by shrinking, but by expanding, filling the darkness with movement and meaning. The torches flicker against the temple walls, revealing faint carvings of the goddess herself. Artemis, the huntress, bow in hand, half wild, half divine. She is every Spartan woman's mirror, graceful yet deadly serene, yet unyielding. You feel her presence in your heartbeat, in the vibration of your bare souls against the stone. It's not fear you feel, it's recognition. The music shifts, the rhythm tightening like a drawn bowstring. You shout the ancient chant that every girl here knows by heart. It's a hymn, yes, but also a coded manifesto. The words praise courage and discipline. But between the lines, they hum with defiance. We are not ornaments. We are origin. It's subversion wrapped in ritual, and every participant understands the game. At the edge of the temple court, a few older men watch silently, their expressions unreadable. Technically, this is a religious ceremony, but everyone knows it's more than that. These dances are rehearsals for authority. The precision, the endurance, the confidence, their training disguised as devotion. You realize that while Spartan men perfect their bodies for war, the women perfect theirs for power. You might wonder, did these rituals ever challenge the patriarchy outright? Not in words, but in effect, yes. Every step you take is a declaration that strength belongs to everyone, not just to those who wear armor. The chants praise heroes, but also mock cowardice, sometimes openly. During festivals like the Gymnopedia, maidens publicly sang songs teasing men who showed weakness in battle. Imagine that being roasted in song by women who could outrun you. It must have stung worse than a spear wound. Tonight's ritual feels lighter, but carries the same message. The moon casts its silver upon your faces, blurring the line between mortal and divine. You spin, leap, and land in unison with your sisters. The air smells of sweat and time, and the sound of your breathing forms a strange kind of music, human, fierce, alive. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls as if answering the rhythm. You catch the eye of an older woman across the circle, her face lined but radiant, her arms raised high. She nods once, and you know what she's saying without words. We keep the flame alive. These gatherings are more than tradition, they're preservation. While Spartan men carry the torch of war, women carry the fire of continuity. One defends the borders, the other defends the spirit. There's humor here too. Between chants, someone cracks a quiet joke about the men's endless drills, and the group erupts in hushed laughter. It's the kind of laugh that builds unity, not mockery, a reminder that endurance doesn't mean joyless stoicism. Strength can smile. Even Artemis, stern goddess that she is, might have smirked tonight. If you squint, the whole scene almost looks modern. The synchronization, the music, the freedom, it's reminiscent of group dance workouts or feminist protests, but stripped of slogans and replaced with sheer embodiment. It's protest through presence. You might think of yoga studios, choir rehearsals, or marathon runners, the way shared motion builds silent solidarity. Sparta had discovered that long before hashtags or banners. By the time the music fades, the stars have shifted, and your throat is raw from singing. You're exhausted, but not empty. Sweat drips down your spine, cool and satisfying. When you bow to Artemis, you're not just honoring a goddess. You're saluting every woman who ever refused to disappear. You leave the temple quietly, the moonlight sketching silver paths across the stones. Behind you, the scent of olive oil and burnt offerings lingers in the air. You feel taller somehow, though you've barely grown an inch. Maybe that's what these rituals were designed for, to remind you that power doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it just needs the courage to dance under the moon and call that act holy. The next morning, sunlight spills through the courtyard, bright and almost nosy, as if curious about what the moon witnessed last night. The scent of roasted grain drifts through the air, and women carry amphorae balanced on their heads, their backs straight as spears. You're older now, no longer the girl who danced for Artemis, but a woman standing at the edge of another kind of ritual marriage. Sparta's strangest battlefield. Forget everything you know about Greek weddings, the garlands, the poetry, the soft sighs of flute music. Sparta has little patience for that. Here a marriage is an act of selection, almost like recruiting for a new alliance. The bride isn't a trembling maiden. She's a strategist entering a long campaign. Your groom is chosen carefully, not by your romantic preference, but by his standing discipline and potential to strengthen Sparta's bloodline. The process feels more like a chess move than a love story. Still, that doesn't mean you're powerless. In many cases, women have a say. You've trained beside these men, raced against them, mocked their failures. You know their strengths better than any matchmaker could. The ceremony itself is brief, but its symbolism is sharp. Before the wedding night, your head is shaved, a gesture meant to resemble the youthfulness of a boy. You wear a man's cloak and sandals, waiting in a darkened room. Then the groom, often living separately, even after marriage, must capture you in a ritual abduction, carrying you to his quarters. The act is theatrical, not violent, though. To modern eyes, it might look strange. But in the dim flicker of oil lamps, the gesture carries meaning union in strength, not submission in softness. There's an awkward tenderness in this system. Spartan husbands rarely linger at home. Military duty keeps them away most nights. Many women live apart, managing estates, making their own decisions, even maintaining the household economy. Imagine a society where married couples might only meet in secret whispering between obligations. It sounds lonely, but perhaps that's what makes each meeting electric, wrapped in secrecy and mutual respect. You hear laughter echoing from another courtyard, two older women gossiping about a new bride who dared to tease her husband for being too slow at drills. "She'll make him faster," one says, smirking. That's Sparta's version of romance irony sharpened into affection. From a distance, other Greeks couldn't understand this kind of partnership. To them, marriage was about hierarchy, husband commanding, wife obeying. But here in Sparta, where women are trained to manage everything from land to livestock, the balance is different. When men spend most of their lives in barracks, someone has to keep the gears turning. The result, Spartan wives become de facto heads of households, stewards of estates, and guardians of legacy. Take Gorgo, Queen of Sparta, for instance. Her intelligence was legendary. When a foreigner once asked her why Spartan women were the only ones who could rule men, she replied with a grin, "Because we are the only ones who give birth to men." Another time, when a slave offered her a jewel as a gift, she refused it, saying, "I adorn myself with the character of my husband." That wasn't submission, it was strategy. She was reminding everyone that Spartan power was collective, not cosmetic. You can't help but smile at that thought. Imagine a modern woman walking into a boardroom with that kind of confidence. Gorgo would have been the one leading the meeting, calm and sharp, her words hitting harder than any sword. As days pass, you settle into the rhythm of this new role. You learn to balance independence with partnership, to turn domestic routines into forms of leadership. You oversee servants, monitor the harvest, and ensure the farm produces enough grain for the soldiers stationed afar. When disputes arise between neighbors, they come to you for arbitration. The lines between wife, governor, and general blur beautifully. Sometimes you stand by the gate at sunset, watching the horizon where your husband trains with the others. You feel no ache of loneliness, only pride. Spartan women aren't taught to wait. They're taught to build. And while he polishes his shield, you polish the city's future. You think of the saying carved on an old temple wall: "Where women are strong, the city stands firm." Maybe that's why Sparta survived longer than its enemies expected. It wasn't built solely on bronze and biceps, but on the quiet governance of women who knew when to bend and when to command. You glance down at your hands, calloused yet graceful. These are not idle hands. They hold the reins of an entire household, the unseen levers that keep the military engine running. You don't pray for your husband's victory, you expect it. And he knows that expectation burns brighter than any torch. When the night comes, you light a small lamp and sit by the window, the wind rustling the olive trees outside. Somewhere in the distance, you hear soldiers chanting in rhythm. You hum along softly, not out of longing, but solidarity. You both fight in your own ways. And in the silence between heartbeats, you understand why Sparta feared no army. Because even its homes were built like fortresses. Morning dew beads on the bronze of the courtyard basin, and the scent of crushed figs and goat's milk drifts from the kitchens. The city is quieter today, its warriors gone to drill its market, hushed, but within one small house, a different kind of battle is beginning. You are heavy with life now, and in Sparta, pregnancy isn't weakness. It's warfare by other means. From the moment you first feel the quickening inside you, you know this isn't about sentiment. The entire city holds its breath for your womb. Every Spartan mother is a national asset. Every unborn child a potential soldier or mother of soldiers. It's not romanticized, it's ritualized. Women gather around you with advice passed down like military tactics. Eat barley for strength, run short distances every morning, bathe in cold water to keep your body awake. You laugh at the absurdity sometimes, but you follow it all. Because here motherhood isn't private, it's patriotic. Your midwife is older than the olive trees, with hands like stone and a face carved by decades of wind. She's seen everything, breech births, twins, even stillborns carried off without a tear. Courage, she says, rubbing olive oil on your belly. The goddess watches. She means Artemis Orthia again, the same huntress you once danced for under the moon. Only now her worship feels less symbolic and more biological. Artemis governs childbirth too. Proof that the same divine hand that blesses the hunt also blesses the scream. Pregnancy in Sparta is oddly public. Neighbors check in on you, not with soft coos, but practical advice. You should lift weights, says one. It strengthens the back. Another recommends walking uphill daily. No one tells you to stay indoors or to avoid exhaustion. They'd be horrified by modern prenatal yoga or hospital bed rest. Spartan logic is simple, only strength creates strength. And yet there's tenderness tucked inside this rigidity. When you rest older, women visit bearing cheese and honey quietly, rubbing your hands, murmuring tales of their own deliveries. They don't coddle, they calibrate. You'll do fine, one says, because you know pain already. That's their version of comfort. Oddly enough, it works. As your belly swells, you feel connected to the entire Spartan mythos. You're a link in a chain that stretches back to the founders, women who outlasted famine, sieges, and endless farewells. You recall a saying attributed to the mothers of Thermopylae. We bore men, not cowards. It's more than pride, it's a spiritual economy. The city invests its faith in your endurance. And endurance in Sparta is sacred. When labor begins, you are not surrounded by weeping or incense. The air smells of salt and sweat, and your midwife gives you no soothing words, only commands. Breathe, push, do not scream, you obey. Not because you must, but because generations have done the same. The room feels small, but timeless. The same scene repeated across centuries, every birth a reaffirmation of the Spartan code. When the baby finally arrives, the midwife lifts it up to the lamplight, inspecting every limb. You wait silent while she decides if this tiny creature is fit for the city. Her eyes scan her finger's test. Then she nods, and only then do you exhale. Relief floods through you like warm water, and for a brief stolen moment, the world softens. Outside, a neighbor woman starts a chant of thanks to Artemis. The rhythm spreads, others join in. It's not loud, just steady like the beat of a heart. You hold your child's smell of new life and olive oil filling your nose, and for the first time, the Spartan doctrine doesn't feel harsh. It feels holy. Still, the work begins immediately. Within days, you're walking again because idleness is the enemy. You nurse the baby under the shade of an olive tree while giving orders to servants, calculating rations, and planning repairs for the granary roof. There's no maternity leave here, there's continuity. You're reminded of how modern mothers juggle spreadsheets, deadlines, and sleepless nights. The tools may have changed, but the rhythm feels ancient. Spartan women would have understood burnout long before the term existed. The difference is they didn't call it exhaustion. They called it honor. As the months pass, your baby grows. You rub oil on his skin and murmur little proverbs, courage before comfort, duty before ease. You don't teach fear because fear is foreign here. When he cries, you rock him not with lullabies, but with rhythm, a steady beat, mimicking marching feet. The walls of the house almost seem to echo back approvingly. Sometimes you wonder if this unyielding discipline ever cracks. Late at night, when everyone's asleep, you catch yourself humming a tune softer than any Spartan melody, a little song that sounds suspiciously like love. You pause guilty, then laugh quietly. Even warriors deserve tenderness, especially tiny ones. Then dawn comes and the city wakes again to drills and duties. You stand by the doorway, holding your child up to the rising light, just as your mother once held you. May you bring honor, you whisper. But there's something else buried in your voice, something unspoken, ancient, and universal. May you live.